Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day, but also an interesting day. I hope to keep this exciting for you. So I'm Seth Blumberg. I'm a behavioral economist at Google. If you want the slides, they're available, but if you look ahead, you will spoil whatever might be interesting of information revelation as we go. So I'm here. I'm invited to talk about prediction markets. Thank you very much to the organizers. I really appreciate it. So I run a prediction market, but it's much smaller and doesn't involve real money in the way that other people who have been on the stage and are involved in running a prediction market have mentioned. We don't publish a lot externally about it. There was one blog post. There was a paper I collaborated with some colleagues in Google DeepMind. But it continues to go. We continue to research with it. And while I don't have internal research to share with you today, I will share my perspectives that are informed by all that. So, some sort of distillation process. So, should surprise no one, two big trends that I think make the whole space very interesting. One, AI systems are getting better at forecasting. Two, prediction markets are growing enormously in the public and achieving more public acceptance, also more public debate. So, these trends seem likely to continue, but it's a forecasting problem. And so I'm going to structure my talk around these two basic questions, right? As AI systems get better at doing forecasting, first, the output, what should we be using it for? And secondly, what are the constraints? What inputs do we need to make it better, either generally overall or at particular domains, which might be very high value for society, but are constrained today? So a simple framework. This is not the full inference, 9-step forecasting cycle, although you'll see I left white space to add other elements. You have a question about the future. You have a system that gives you a prediction. You do something with that. I said decision. I suppose it could just be entertainment value as well. Here's one particular use case, a very standard one you could imagine, right? You have a system that makes good forecasts. You have some investment problem. Where should I allocate my time, my resources? What should I do? So for instance, maybe you're the Norwegian government. You want to know about the future of climate change in the seas. Why? Okay, well, your model says somewhat likely. I think 26% might fall under somewhat likely. Your action might be, okay, we need to invest in resilience for fish farming. Straightforward use case from a product perspective. If this is a set of people who actually cares about this outcome, it seems entirely plausible to me that they would ask the system for that advice. Maybe it wouldn't come out in the form of a probability. As Philip Tetlock mentioned this morning, a lot of human beings have real trouble thinking in terms of probability. Is 26 a lot? Is it a little? But a system that's good at this type of calibrated forecasting and has other incentives and training to be helpful, that might make it better at giving advice. Okay, here's another form of how you could try to forecast to inform a decision problem. Just try to ask your forecasting system, what is the ROI of different projects? So you're a pharma company. This is a particular class of gene therapy cancer treatment, which in fact, ended up being a successful cancer drug and I think released maybe early 2010s. This is a classic problem. The base rate is quite low. In some domains, 3% of candidates will make it through certain stages of clinical trials. If your model, which you trust, says it's 7% likely, in this case, that's actually a lot. That suggests, hey, maybe it's worth investing. Good, let's go invest. Or, maybe if you have a scarce team of human scientists whom you trust, you can use this and do that as another layer of checking. Another resource problem, and here the prediction is what is the ROI of making this choice over that choice? Financial trading. To me, this is sort of the clearest, most obvious one. The fact that, this is supported by financial trading companies. There's a lot of interest in it. If you can make something that is better than everyone else at forecasting, one domain you can turn that to is forecast asset prices and make trades for it. Will oil be above $100 a barrel a year from now? If your model says it's very likely, okay, I'm going to go long on some particular futures for 1 year in the future. This scales. But I should add, this is sort of a hothouse plant. This requires all this social infrastructure, right? If you were 2,000 years ago in Rome or, a society that doesn't have a concentration of people, being great at this would not be a terribly useful skill. So it relies on the fact that we've set up this financial plumbing and this incentive system, and plenty of technological and other advances in machine learning and, applying quantitative skills have, fed into this pipeline. Let me talk a little more about this one because I think it's actually very interesting because it's an area where we expect there's going to be a lot more development to this, a lot of deployment, I think it's worth thinking through when should we expect that it will be beneficial, not just to the people who employ it and earn profits, but also to society more generally. Okay, so let me switch for a minute to inputs. I'm going to go back and forth between inputs and outputs. Let's say you want a forecast about oil prices or something. How would you do it? Well, one is you can do a centralized system, get one of these Blackwell chips, rent it from a hyperscaler. You are the only one who runs it. You spend your resources of electricity, water, whatever, to have it output that forecast, or maybe you hire humans. Makes sense, centralized. Or you can use a market mechanism, a stock market, a prediction market, or some other decentralized crowdsourced system like a forecasting contest with incentives on it. Now, if your goal, right, if the information is valuable to you because you already have a financial market to trade in where, that's how you're going to use it, then you really care about relative information. You want to have better knowledge about the future that the whole rest of the world doesn't have. So if you turn to a prediction market about, geopolitics, and you're going to use that to forecast asset prices in, larger, more liquid financial markets, everyone has access to that information. Now, you might be more clever in using it and, analyzing it, which fair game, like that's what a lot of quantitative trading is about. But if you were trying to look for a way to better understand, geopolitical events in order to make financial trades, you would want to keep that in-house. I think but there's actually kind of more fundamental problems about, let's say you had a different use case and you wanted to know about COVID or, the North Atlantic Sea and climate change. It isn't actually obvious, why you should be able to ask financial markets. You might say, okay, so why would anyone be supplying those forecasts in the markets? You might say, oh, it's obvious, the market's there, they will trade and make money from it. But economic theory actually struggles with this, right? The Grossman-Stiglitz paradox says, if a strong version, or if a version of the efficient market hypothesis holds, markets already incorporate all publicly available information, well, then there's no alpha from doing more research. Markets already know everything there is to be known. So who's actually going to provide that good if, there's nothing to be earned from it? So this is kind of a rebuttal of that strongest form of the efficient market hypothesis. And I prefer a slightly weaker one, which is some sort of equilibrium where, if you pay $500,000 to hire a very smart PhD student and, give them the resources they need, in expectation, you should make a little more than $500,000 in profit. If that didn't hold, then either you would cut back, or if it didn't hold in the other direction, you would keep hiring until those profits were whittled away. Now, of course, it's very noisy, you shouldn't expect this to exactly hold, but that's kind of the equilibrium condition I keep in mind. So this very old Milgram and Stokey paper from the 70s, which I think was eventually published 20 years later, 30 years later, is the no trade theorem. This is another fundamental problem with markets, right? If let's say I put out an open order, and I think about this a lot in much smaller, less liquid markets like our internal one. Let's say you want to make a bet about, will this project deliver on time? It looks like it's been behind schedule. You've done making a good base rate. Maybe you want to say, no, I think it's less than 10% likely. Well, that won't trade unless you already have market making institutions, which is, helps fill that role. That won't trade unless someone takes the other side. And so you have to ask not just what do I today believe is the probability of this event to happen. You have to ask conditional on someone coming and taking the other side. In that case, it might be someone far in the future of when you started that order, or it might be someone who has a lot more information than you and would only trade in the state of the world where they know things you do not. So this is, the strong version of the no trade theorem kind of says, unless there's some other need like hedging or people are irrational and not Bayesians, which people are not perfect Bayesians, we shouldn't be able to trade. If I think something is a good trade from my side in expectation, you should also believe that and you shouldn't want to make it. And I'll add, not a 1,000 citation economic paper, but this blog post that several of us talked about from a few years ago, basically arguing, look, prediction markets have been a cool idea for a while. They really haven't taken off. Why? Well, savers want basically positive returns over time. You invest in the stock market, hopefully on average it goes up. And gamblers want excitement. A lot of prediction market things might take a long time. And the sharps, people who, are clever and can have an edge, well, they want liquidity. Now, looking back, this ended up being a pretty bad prediction. And I think it's interesting, to think about why. I think the framework is perfectly good. Okay, so one answer for why anyone would trade is hedging. This is like a classic economic answer, right? You're an airline, you have a risk you can't really control about geopolitics and oil prices, but it very much affects your profit margin. Maybe you would like to get contracts to, lock that in, even if on average it costs you something. And indeed, oil, has moved around. While I was looking for a good article to paste here as a screenshot, I learned that actually there's West Texas Intermediate, there's Brent crude, and those diverged in ways that were annoying. So there's always basis risk if you want to try to use, a market which measures one thing that's highly correlated to the thing you care about, but isn't quite the same. Okay, nothing's perfect. So this is a very classic answer. And I think, part of the thesis of Kalshi, Polymarket, others that are in this space is, hey, there's a huge latent demand for hedging. People have a lot of risks they don't currently hedge. Right now it's for these extremely high value use cases, but if it got easier enough, if it felt more normal, if it was something you expected your VPs to do, to say here's the prediction market contracts I use to manage this risk, then actually there could be a huge market for it. I think that's entirely possible, but it wouldn't shock me if in 10 years we were not there. That the thing that's weird today, big companies would continue to run just kind of self-insuring those risks. So I think I wouldn't be surprised either way. I'm rooting for this, and I think it's a good problem to think about as a product perspective, but I'm not sure. Okay, another answer is, entertainment. Sports are fun. If you're watching a boring game and you are chronically short on dopamine because your brain has been fried by social media or for whatever reason, okay, you can add a little more excitement to it. I don't do a lot of sports gambling. I think, people who are really into it and are really strong fans of their team get a different sort of entertainment. And, I'm channeling Matt Levine's column, but yeah, crypto is also sports. Politics is sport. You can generate excitement for it. And I would just add, compared to this morning, this is a chart that shows Kalsi's vast majority of it is sports. What we heard this morning is actually it's more diversified than that. So, these are two different data points. I put a lot less thought into this one than she into hers. But and I don't want to, I think it's easy to dismiss sports and say, oh, that's unimportant. That's not a domain where we really care about, what is the probability, unless you're going to use it to bet. And I think that's kind of true. We don't consume that the way we consume what's futures price of oil. But this is an answer to that no trade theorem. Why would someone trade even if it is negative expected value and they think there's a quant firm on the other side? Well, maybe they like it. Maybe they want some risk. And if you, bet $100 and, in fact, it's a slightly negative expected value, maybe an expected value would only cost you $5. And you would probably spend more than that on Uber Eats. Now, of course, gambling can be problematic for many people. But I don't want to just focus on there's a view that, oh, gambling is bad. We should not have it in society, perhaps. But I think many, many people bet on things or do financial marketing stuff for excitement. And, it doesn't ruin their life. They enjoy it. Maybe they develop skills. So I just want to point out this entertainment aspect is actually one solution to how you might subsidize this. And, when I look around, you think about what's going to be left with AGI, actually we turn a lot of things into entertainment, right? Formula One drives, I was not an F1 fan before this. Now I kind of get it. And what is this? This is competitive engineering. It's almost like the ultimate sport of the heights of society, science and engineering, and, the drive and nerves of the person in the seat together. Maybe lower culture, higher culture is there's whole channels devoted to real estate, right? We maybe, especially in America, but I think not uniquely in the United States, find ways to get entertainment value out of a lot of things. And you can have different views about it, but one thing I'll just point out is sometimes that might cross-subsidize valuable activity in other areas. This one lives rent-free in my head. So, maybe this is what our post-AGI world will look like. Not sure. It would be nice if it did. It would be nice if it was subsidizing information that was useful for highly valuable aims like science and health and all those other things. Okay, so traditionally, what are prices, right? So the Hayekian view says prices help coordinate society. The people who ran the Soviet economy didn't know how much wheat people need, didn't know how much oranges. I guess they didn't grow oranges there. Prices communicate information about supply and demand, and people use that for economic decisions, hedging risk. And think about it. Each person, why are they generating this information? You go to the supermarket, cherries are $20, and you think, I don't like cherries that much. You are making decisions, contributing something about your demand, which is probably predictive of other people's demand, that gets aggregated into prices. You're doing a little work and contributing information to society in so doing. So what might be the nature of AI forecasting driven changes to price? Do we think that it's going to benefit society as a whole? Do we think it's primarily going to benefit those who are doing the trading? I think primarily, yeah. If you have a clever trading strategy or are deploying resources and talent well, you're going to be the primary person who gains. But, we're comfortable with that in capitalist societies. Everyone is available to trade. If you have better strategies, you will earn more than others in a risk-weighted way. But, there are some examples which I think are closer to zero sum. So, or at least you can offer this critique. So, about a decade ago, people were talking about high-frequency trading. People have been talking about high-frequency trading. But in particular, like, hey, let's build a microwave connection to send information from Chicago to New York and back a few milliseconds quicker. Now, you can argue, and I just had this debate over lunch, actually what this is doing is reducing risk. It reduces bid-ask spreads. So, I think there's a debate to be had. But I think, when I think of this, if primarily what we're doing is putting a lot of resources into building stuff whose main benefit is I can be a little ahead of the other guy. And let me show you some sort of basic econ 101 kind of stuff that gives a little lens. Because here's an economist telling you, oh, maybe free competition is actually not that beneficial. How do you decide when? Okay, so I drew some supply and demand curves. Maybe you can think of this as a market for oil. Okay, so Econ 101 says if this is the supply and this is the demand, they meet somewhere, that's the equilibrium price. Under certain conditions, that price gives you socially optimal allocations. But suppose there's a mispricing. Suppose for whatever reason, Grossman-Stiglitz paradox, society is not there. Or, this commodity is only $20. Well, the commodity, people who might be willing to sell it at 50 and not at 20 are not going to sell it. Maybe they won't drill oil wells or they'll hold on to it or whatever. And the quantity that society gets to consume will be less than optimal. Suppose you realize, hey, society is misunderstanding this. I can, through some market transactions, push those prices higher. Well, what happens? Before that, let me just, so we have green and red. Green is all the surplus. The surplus is the integral between these. And it represents sort of, here's someone whose willingness to pay is 100. Here's someone whose willingness to sell is 0. And there's a $100 pie to be shared between those people. These people have more like a $60 pie to share. As long as there's some, win-win value to be shared, it's better to do the transaction than not. And we should keep doing that until that flip sign and goes negative. That's what, the social planner who controls everything in theory, as a thought experiment, would do. So suppose you do something that causes the price to go up. Well, what happens? Now the surplus is this dark green area. Great. You have probably earned some money from noticing what the price should be, which is, I guess, maybe not pictured on this graph. But in so doing, you cause transactions which are beneficial and net to take place to actually take place where they are stopped. This is the same sort of graph you see, to argue why rent control it causes problems, minimum wage. Again, these are all policies that are actually more nuanced than the Econ 101 version, but this channel is certainly an important one. And okay, so the point I want to raise is this fun fact. The delta P, the social loss it's sort of the area of this Harberger triangle. That's what we could be realized if we only had the right prices. And that's proportional to the square of that delta, which here is from 50 to 30. It's now been reduced from deltas 30 to deltas 20. As you incrementally move the price closer to what the equilibrium optimal amount is, you're still generating positive surplus in green, but it's smaller each time. And so one way to think about why you might argue actually high frequency trading, it's generating private profits for those who are doing it, but not that much social value, is the changes are very, very small and they're not persistent for very long. So what you would ideally like if you have tools that make us better at pricing assets generally is, sure, they may as well do things in the short term, move prices at a few points here and there, but it would be great if it got the things that we were getting wrong for a long time that were very far off and if we noticed them, like value investing. So you would want to find a big mispricing that was present for a long time and that matters to important decisions for society. Let me give you some candidates of things that might look like this. DRAM, we have a shortage. The world decided there was a shortage and that it would be very profitable for Micron or other components that are upstream of the AI hardware value chain. This company shot up really in a hurry. And in theory, their high stock prices are a signal of markets to say you can raise money much more easily, you can do projects, you can expand supply. Of course, many hardware component makers have sort of been burned by previous cycles, so they're making their own decisions based on those incentives. But it's an incentive to say what you do is socially valuable. You can command an incredibly high price for it. Society believes you're likely to continue to command that high price in the future. Therefore, we collectively want you to be able to invest more resources. And another one is compute. So, CME Group is working on futures markets for it. seems like, there's a lot of uncertainty. Is AI a bubble? Is it just going to go up and up and, we're going to have 20% growth rates forever? I don't know. It seems an extremely socially important question. And, I think this is a channel where even though finance is a very specialized thing, it's well suited for this if you can set up those rails for it to go on, be they prediction markets, more traditional financial markets, whatever. Okay, so let me switch back to inputs. So what else do you need in order to do good forecasts? Here's this, Norwegian sea ice fish farming example. You need data, particularly, at inference time. Also, if you're thinking about training, you need relevant data for it. Here it might be oceanic data, climate modeling, all kinds of things that might be relevant. And, there's a lot to be said for how do I scrape and find the available data well, right? We've seen papers today where, that's an important step in having your model improve. I think I take a little longer view of like, how is it even present? Who creates that data? Do we have the right incentives? People who worry that with, people using AI chatbots instead of searching the internet, maybe the web is dying. There was a business model where you would click on links, go to the site, and, there would be advertising revenue to be earned. And, I think, we did some forecasting questions, and actually the number of active websites hasn't really fallen yet, but that's not saying it won't. So, what leads to the supply of that type of information, and how do you get it? How does news get supplied? Let me ask that, right? If you go back, the things that turned into newspapers, there were groups of people that had a reason to pay for it. So like Lloyd's List was like what ships are coming into port, and expanded to be about news in foreign countries. Variety, which I think of as a magazine to entertain people, it was an industry journal. Like this Broadway show, this vaudeville play, was this popular? This person left from here to there. So there was a group of people who were willing to, through a business model of like buying a physical newspaper, subsidize or collectively pay for information that was valuable to them. And I would add, this is not quite rival information in the way like a trading edge was. If maybe you might want to know before someone else which play is going to be really popular, but you still want to know even if everyone else already knows it. This is another example of a societal institution that if you're just building one model, you take as given, here's the information available, but we should think broader. How can we catalyze the creation of this kind of information? And, in the previous Mantic talk, I was kind of thinking, yeah, if we're stalling out on AI progress, maybe the answer is the bitter lesson. We need ways to generate new data that will enable us to better figure out, like, is Michael going to be popular at the box office? Maybe we need a lot more surveys. Maybe, I don't know, we need ways for people in whatever app they're using to tell us and reward them and make it worth their while. I'm not sure, but, I feel like it will be a valuable dimension. Actually, let me add one more example to this, which I didn't put in the slides. So, we saw earlier this morning the plot of, Kalshi's implied probability of Trump winning the U.S. election. Around October, as we've learned, there was a trader in France who put millions of dollars betting Trump would win the election and would win the popular vote, which I think was around 20 cents on the dollar, considered unlikely. In fact, he won both. And, it's all ex post, but what he said to newspapers was, I commissioned my own surveys. I paid resources to generate new information, and it was a surveys with a different methodology. Social science suggests if people are reticent about sharing something about their own behavior, maybe if you ask them, do you think people around you will do this? So instead of asking, are you going to vote for Trump? It's, do you think your neighbors will vote for Trump? So, ex post, that was very informative. But notice he had to do it like full stack. He had to have the idea to do this, commission the survey, and then go trade on it as well. 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible to do all that. But I think, to me, that's inspiring in the sense of, could we disaggregate that? Could we have a way to make markets for people who can generate useful information that helps you know about the world through funneling it into better forecasts? I think it might be possible. And I think it would be really useful. Okay, so going back to this stack, there's another thing that you might want to make decisions, which I've seen time and time again in working with people to try to, inform decisions with forecasting, which is human beings don't know what to do with 26% likely. We're not used to thinking with that. We don't know if it's a lot or a little. And it's hard to judge if it's correct. Maybe you can see the track record of this forecasting system or of the prediction market, but, should you trust it? But if it comes with rationales, those are sort of easier to verify. If the reasons are things that make sense to you, things that after you've heard it sounds, oh yeah, that's good, I'm going to incorporate that into my own reasoning. I think humans are good at digesting that stuff. So this can be co-produced. It could be in the reasoning traces. You can ask your models to output it. If you have human forecasters, you can ask them to output it, but you don't get it automatically. I guess on prediction markets, you do get comment threads, which again are mostly, I think, driven by entertainment, but another output that could be very valuable to drive decisions. So how can you get good rationales? I think having pretty good AI forecasters is a tool we can use to elicit and score a lot of types of information. So, in this case, it's not just me. Ezra Karger and co-authors have some work on how to incentivize explanations. And the basic idea, I'm going to oversimplify and do the version that I thought of, which is pretty similar, of you can do ablation. Here's a forecast of this future event. With this explanation, here's a forecast without it. If the explanation at the RAG step improved the quality of the forecast, maybe you'd need to sample it multiple times if it's noisy, we're going to judge that, we're going to call that informative. Now, you don't know right away what's informative. Just like prediction markets and scored forecasting, you have to wait until resolution if you really want to know. But that makes it, you're making a bounty for the thing you want. You're paying for outputs. Just like when you have a prediction market or you have scoring with prizes in a probabilistic forecasting, you're also rewarding output. And that means you could hill climb with RL, you can make a bounty and crowdsource it. So I think, more and more things that we can put into this format of, I know how to give a bounty for what I want, that means we can scale. And to me, that's very exciting. We can do market design on it. Okay, I'm switching back and forth. Another use case. Well, we have wiser policies. I think COVID is sort of an area where forecasting rationalists did extremely well. I think probably everyone in this room had a moment. Many of us can remember the moment when you realized, oh, this COVID is going to be a big deal. For me, it was sometime in February. I knew someone who was, in the rationalist community who, lived in the Bay Area and got himself a RV and left big cities, which normally that you're like, wow, this person's really crazy. That might have been the correct call. The disease was not as deadly as we feared it was, but it was still extremely bad. So, if policymakers, want to understand what will be the effects of policies, what should we do? We actually want to make things good. Then, better forecasts in geopolitics, in the effects of policies on our outcomes, that will be enormously valuable. But I think we shouldn't get too carried away automatically, right? If you read Asimov as a kid, if you read Robin Hanson's Time of the Next Few Years, the Foundation is a book about what if people are so smart they can understand what's going to happen in history for thousands of years and take actions that will help it. Pretty cool. You can read Paul Krugman has articles where he's like, yeah, this is what inspired me to become an economist. And Robin Hanson, full of super interesting ideas, says what we should do is futarchy is a system, which doesn't have to be for a government, anything that makes decisions. Instead of voting on which policy should we do or who should we elect, you set the priority and you ask a prediction market or out crowdsource somehow which policies, if we enact them, will improve health, improve education, reduce recidivism. So that sort of causal effects question you outsource to the market. I think maybe, to me, this is an exciting use case that, it's hard to get people to do new things like this. So, you might also think, oh, we'll avoid wars. I don't have to look back too far to find wars that were based on miscalculations. The U.S. invaded Iraq and seemed to either believe or want everyone to believe there were weapons of mass destruction there, and also that it would be a quick, painless war. Russia invaded Ukraine. Seems they were genuinely surprised that they didn't immediately conquer them. So, but maybe I'm cherry picking stories, but if they had access to accurate forecasts of how difficult that military campaign would be, would they have not done it? They kind of already had access. They either chose to ignore other opinions or disincentivize them. Who's going to tell Vladimir Putin, no, you shouldn't do this thing that or that you believe is really worth doing and is an extremely valuable political aim? No, motivated reasoning, especially in groups, is very strong. Now, maybe this shouldn't be our canonical example. Maybe more things look like COVID and education policy, where wise advice will be heeded because people want to do a good job, as opposed to people are committed to an action and don't want to hear other advice. But think will it lead us to a world where we don't have wars anymore? I think probably not. I think it's another type of arms race. The Guns of August is about World War I started. To everyone's surprise, Europe sleepwalked into war. But if England and Germany in 1895 had really good forecasters, what would those forecasters have said? They probably would have said, England, you're going to fight Germany in 20 years. Germany, you're going to fight England in 20 years, and would have reinforced what they did, which is arm, build ships and everything, which ended up leading to this being an extremely destructive war. So I don't have a view that forecasting is going to make like wars more common or more dangerous. I just also don't have a view that like it's going to fix the problems. I think they're deeper than just we don't have good enough advice. I should add my epistemic status on all this is like these are interesting ideas. I'm willing to debate them. Okay, so coming back from war to ingredients. I was talking about the inputs you would need to make good forecasts like at inference time. What about for training? Frankly, questions matter in both cases. We've seen some ideas already. How could you source good questions? I think, yeah, Mantic's idea is a sensible one, and I'm interested to see how it works. I think, Haifeng mentioned crux, or maybe Ezra Karga mentioned it this morning. So when they use the word crux, they mean like an intermediate event that's more short-term, that whose forecast is informative about the longer one. That plays a similar role to something that might come in the RAG stage, a very clever take about politics that updates your forecast. I think in general, though, like I don't have an idea that like I love that I think could work here. I think it's a hard problem. What are you going to use the information for? How will you measure how much that information is appreciated? But again, I think being able to scale all these things means you can outsource them to a crowd. You can give them to machines. It lets that pipeline go a lot faster. Okay. Similarly, with rationales, actually, sorry, I put the star in the wrong place. I'm going to talk about resolutions now. So if you want to train, if you're just asking for a forecast, you don't really need to come back. You just make your decision. Maybe the makers of the system or maybe your own personal memory of your AI system would perform better if you said, no, that didn't work out. That was stupid advice. But you're kind of done. You made your decision. That's a commitment to the long term. But if you're trying to train good systems, then you actually do need a source of truth. How did things resolve? Resolution is very tricky. This is one thing I have learned running a small prediction market. Will China end its COVID-0 policy? The answer ended up being yes. But for a day, the New York Times said basically what the Chinese government said, which is, no, we're doing an adjustment. We're not getting rid of this policy. Within 24 hours, the news cycle had come to a consensus of, no, they're making a very large change. But if you were betting on will they end COVID-0, there was a day when we ex post decided they had, but on that day it wasn't immediately obvious. There was, okay, this was on Polymarket. Will the U.S. enter Iran? Will there be boots on the ground? There was an operation where like a helicopter went in to get a downed pilot. Does that count as an invasion? I think the spirit of a question like that is like, will the U.S. do a ground invasion of Iran? The letter of the thing you're betting on, you have to be very precise. So, reality always has these edge cases. You should also watch out for good harding of facts. Someone, I think to earn like on the order of like less than $10,000 or $20,000, put a space heater in Charles de Gaulle in the Paris airport because they were betting on the temperature in Paris, but the basis risk was not the temperature in Paris, it was the reading of this one temperature sensor. Now this one is pretty benign. I mean, if our weather sensors were at a much larger scale tampered with, that would be a problem, right? If you have markets about wildfires and someone starts a fire in order to win a bet, that's a really big problem. Probably that outweighs any information benefit you might have gotten from, learning about it. So I think good harding is the right frame. Once it starts to matter more, if it's relatively cheap to manipulate, people might do it, and you have to watch out if you're trying to crowdsource. I had a slide about Zelensky's suit, but I guess I lost it. There was also a whole market about will Vladimir Zelensky wear a suit when he goes to the White House? And he wore something where like it took like fashion experts to weigh in. I don't know if it counts as a suit. So in other domains, how do we resolve things? So if you read Matt Levine's column a lot, you might have noticed like it's infiltrated my brain, and a lot of my examples are from there. So this is not prediction markets. This is Venture Global built a liquefied natural gas plant, and they had secured contracts to sell it at a certain price. And then Russia invaded Ukraine, and the price of oil and natural gas went very high. They were looking for how can we not have to sell at these low prices we've agreed to? Well, their lawyers found a clause that said, oh, we only have to sell when it's finished. So they found ways to sell while saying, no, we're still working on it. And the people on the other side of the contract were not pleased, and that's what contracts are for. They went before arbitration or a judge, and a judge basically said, no, it's done. I don't know if they're out of appeals or not, but if you're trying to say, is it done? How do we know? the answer here is it's whatever the judge, through the thing we consider a legitimate process, rules. And, we're kind of all committed to those rules. So, yeah, when the truth matters for, agreements and people have different views on, have benefit differentially from what gets declared the truth, it can be very hard to adjudicate the truth. I kind of think about it as like a public resource, grazing lands, and now that we're using it, it's used up. So we need to think of how do we actively supply more of that, regrow the forest instead of just clear cutting it. So on resolutions, I think this remains a challenge. So like Kalshi, as I understand, has sort of, a committed internal team, and their answer of how do markets resolve is we will do our absolute best to resolve it well, and, you should trust us. And if you have a complaint, the complaint is with us. Polymarket has a crypto-based protocol, which, has some nice properties to it, but there have also been reports and complaints of basically, if someone is already betting in the prediction market, actually it's not that expensive for them to buy up enough of the tokens to change the resolution. And I think that sort of collusion problem is difficult, maybe not impossible. Maybe if you have AI systems that, you've pre-committed will judge things fairly, maybe you could trust it to those, but I don't know, if the AI system is written by my hedge fund, maybe I'll try to make it rule in a way that's correlated with how I do my predictions as well. I don't think it's intractable. I just think it's difficult. So, there's a method I like called Bayesian truth serum, which is supposed to incentivize people to share what they know, even when you, in this case, the social science researcher, don't know the answer. It's not quite agreement metric. It's sort of about higher order beliefs. So I think something like this might be employed, but I think the collusion problem of someone has an interest in the truth being declared to be a certain way are a challenge for, all of these systems. If you know of papers or work that actually addresses that, it might well exist, but I'm curious. But this is another thing that we're going to need to scale if we want to develop forecasting systems in novel domains, or if we want to, expand prediction markets to be more and more useful and provide information. Slight, not exactly pivot, but I just want to point out that, we had a talk about causality, right? As an economist, like forecasting and causal effects are very different. In some domains, maybe not that much, right? If you're asking which cancer drug, which molecule should I invest in developing into a cancer drug, its effectiveness is probably the same. Its counterfactual effectiveness is probably the same whether or not you decided to do it. But, if you're, oh, should I email this client? Will they buy my B2B SaaS product? If, you get the advice that they're not going to do it, you might skip them. There's correlated information, which is very hard to observe for the analyst, for the econometrician, in decisions. So, for instance, right, when the Fed announces that they're lowering rates, markets move. Why? It might be, one channel is, hey, lower rates might mean that, borrowing is higher and consumption is higher. Another channel is the Fed's data suggests that the market is, maybe this one has the opposite sign of what I was looking for. But the point being, like, when a decision is revealed, it reveals correlated information. Now, if you're sitting on the outside and you just want to make a forecasting model, you don't really have to worry about that. You can, train on past data. But if you're in the Fed and you're like kind of going to recursively use the model, then it might diverge. You might, have less accuracy and not get the policy advice you want if you don't have something that's sort of trained on causality. So, if you're trying to use predictions to inform which decision someone should take, think really carefully about this stuff. And so, I drew this arrow because maybe part of the solution is, all right, you need to train on that environment. If you're building products like this, you need to have your clients agree to feedback the decisions, or they pay a much higher premium amount. You need to think about how can we capture that data, which exists. You tried this under the advice of the system. How did it work? Maybe you would want to inject some orthogonal randomization into the system too, so you have good identification. Again, your customers may not like that, but maybe there's a way you could frame it that they're okay with it. Or maybe you can look in, the logits and capture something that you consider orthogonal noise that's there anyway. So I think there are ways you can attack this, but causality is not the same as prediction. That's a typo. That should say co-produced. So one other aspect of like how do we get value is less the forecast itself and what we do with that information. Hang on, this is bugging me. I'm gonna fix it. There we go. Much better. You get leaderboards, right? If you have a forecasting competition for people, bots, or even with money, there's a result. With money, I guess they become rich. But with leaderboards, you get to see, hey, this person is really good at forecasting this domain. This model is really good at this domain. This team that built the model is good. Maybe you want to hire them to do something else. You believe they have expertise that will be helpful, not in public prediction markets, but in private data inside of your company. So that's information that's co-produced. And the other one, which I don't have any evidence, but I think it's on everyone's mind who works on this, we trained something to predict the next token, and it started eventually being able to do coding. So it might be that if you train something to be good calibrated forecasts, it ends up getting other immersion skills. I think this is certainly a hope, and you might think this as well with people. If you train people to be better calibrated, more rational, maybe they'll make better decisions with their life. Maybe they'll be a better employee, a better entrepreneur, whatever. So, bear this channel in mind as well. Sometimes the thing that creates value is not the direct thing you're creating. It's a co-produced thing, and then you pivot or take advantage of that. Great. I'm coming to the end of this, and I think I still have a few minutes. I've done a mix of optimism and skepticism. I just feel there's so much value that can be created by making systems that are general and good at able to forecast in a calibrated way. Will my flight leave on time? We have regular data science-based predictions, but we can always improve those. I have a toddler. I would love to be able to get better advice that I trusted about what to try and how to interpret the evidence of what helps her go to sleep. In academia, people are worried about drowning in AI slop. How are we going to keep up with peer review? You can convert this to a forecasting question. Might not be the best one. Maybe, what is likely to get the most citations in 5 years reflects things that are not quite the same as its quality. But maybe if you squint, maybe if you're clever, you can find a way to use this to elicit more inputs or do other things to cope with that. And, the big one, like, what's AI going to do to society? It seems pretty important to forecast. So, I had a slide of takeaways, but not needed. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed thinking about this for all of you, and feel free to reach out. And if we have time for questions, I'm happy to take some.
First of all, thank you for your great talk. And you mentioned about causality, and because I'm from academia, I truly believe that causality is very important to improve the prediction or forecasting itself. So I want to ask what do you think about causality? So what I want to ask is that in industry, what do you think about causality in terms of performance of forecasting?
I see. I think, like right now, we don't have, at least that I've seen, people making major decisions just because the model told them. You take it into advisement. We have a forecasting system. I'm going to triangulate my view. So I think it's relatively safe to start doing even though I just gave an invocation of like, don't mix up causality and prediction, I don't think it's that harmful to try and see if maybe this is a domain where there is that bias term, but like it doesn't actually matter that much. But especially if you want to employ these things at scale, I think we have ways to give us causality, natural experiments, do calculus if you believe your graphs, natural and real experiments. So we have ways to generate that stuff. Maybe you can power them up by using forecasting to use smaller samples. But we have ways. A/B testing, really found a lot of applications. That is a tool that we know how to use to generate more causality. But it might not be a good fit for all kinds of decisions you want to make. I'm sure I have further thoughts than that, but not anything like earth-shattering.
Thank you.
Yes.
So in comparison to things like financial markets, there's regulations there where they're trying to prevent negative utility. So things like that temperature space heater, or kind of placing your bets and then in order to manipulate maybe some downstream action or some upstream action.
Shorting a company and then, saying things about it to drive down the stock price that are judged to be false or something like that.
Yeah, so I wonder how you reconcile that with the kind of your view, and is this a big concern, or you think this is kind of just like a minor side effect that we'll have to deal with?
I'm going to put it at medium. I think some of these are kind of, if these become more important, have more money at stake, then we have to watch out for it more. I think people have a sensible moral revulsion to we shouldn't have markets for terrorism, even though it would be extremely useful to have better information about is a terrorist attack likely to occur. I think in sports, there's a lot of concern of like more cheating in small ways for parlays. So, I think people follow the incentives. One possibility could be you could limit who is able to bet in the markets, right? If it's something like if you wanted to use a prediction market for wildfires, well, there's also just an ethical concern that some people feel, I lost my house. Why are you betting for this to happen? Even if you didn't do anything to cause it, that just feels wrong. And, the psychology and economics of moral repugnance is like not to be discarded. But if your ethical system says that's okay, but I certainly don't want to encourage arson, well, maybe you don't open it to everybody. You open it only to vetted people who have a lot to lose of being kicked out of the market. Maybe you can get a lot of the benefits of decentralized forecasting through, policies like that. But yeah, I think of it as a medium concern. It's entirely possible that it might become a much more serious concern. But my hope, maybe it's just optimism motivated reasoning, is there is a path where, we can regulate out many of the harms and still get many of the benefits.
Thanks for the great talk. I do have some questions about the rationals part and the Tell Me Why paper that you introduced. So I think I can imagine that there's a way to elicit rationales and explanations along with the prediction, and also a way to kind of operationalize how informative that is by the outcome in the future. But I think that kind of requires the rationale and the actual prediction to be kind of consistent. For example, if you say that these are the things that are going to positively affect, for example, this specific probability, you may not be perfectly numerically calibrated, but at least directionally, your actual prediction needs to be in that direction.
Bullish.
And how would we incentivize people to be consistent? And yeah, because humans are very bad at these kinds of calibrations in many ways, and what they believe internally and what they say to
We have
this
a lot
kind
of
of platform.
reasons to say things.
might be
My
different.
first instinct is it might not be as much of a problem. Like I wrote this as while you're generating a probabilistic forecast, you also generate a rationale. You could have a contest for bots or humans, which is just an essay contest. Just give a take, write a blog post, and we're going to score it on its informativeness. And if you trust the AI system that you're putting it into and ablating to be pretty good, I don't know where that bar is, then you kind of trust it to take that into account. So I actually think, in this particular example, that kind of if someone exhibits that kind of inconsistency, it doesn't seem like actually a serious problem to me.
All right, so we'll stop there because we have a break now. So if any of you have more questions for Scott, or Seth, sorry, feel free to talk to him during the break if hopefully you're around. And yeah, so we'll resume after a 20-minute break at 3:20. And we'll continue with some oral presentations and then a panel later on as well. So yeah.